In 1980, stepping off a plane at JFK meant stepping into the center of the industrial world. The highways stretched for miles, the public schools in New York routinely produced Nobel physicists, and the culture celebrated the physical act of inventing and building massive things. 40 years later, that same nation found itself unable to manufacture basic N95 masks or ventilators during the early days of a global pandemic. Today, that incapacity extends to national defense. The U.S. struggles to sustain weapon shipments to allies in Europe and the Middle East without depleting its own domestic stockpiles. Shortages like these are often attributed to the broad forces of globalization, but a more specific shift occurred within the Western educational and corporate pipeline. The people who physically built the country, the engineers and scientists, were replaced by a new elite class. Master of Business Administration graduates and corporate lawyers became the standard for global leadership. This credentialism reached the presidency itself. By the early 2000s, the office was occupied by a former investment banker with an MBA. This mindset evaluates success through short-run financial engineering, a framework that prioritizes quarterly dividends over the physical creation of long-term assets. The United States outsourced its factories and replaced the builders of its society with managers, trading away its strategic defenses to ensure consistent quarterly earnings. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the U.S. declared itself the manager of the free market. Policymakers and corporate boards embraced a narrative that heavy industry was obsolete, pivoting toward a service-based economy. Business schools responded by proliferating programs focused on quantitative analysis and strategic shareholder value. They overhauled corporate compensation, rewarding executives who hit quarterly earnings per share, or EPS, targets. EPS is a financial metric calculated by dividing a company's profit by its outstanding shares of common stock. Empirical research by Miller and Shu demonstrates that CEOs with MBA training are statistically more likely to engage in earnings management and cut research and development spending compared to their non-MBA peers. These cuts make the firm look profitable on paper for a few quarters, but lead to the long-term depreciation of the firm's actual value. A parallel shift happened in law schools. Researchers call it public interest drift. Students who enter with a desire to work in infrastructure or constitutional law overwhelmingly shift to lucrative corporate firm roles designed to maximize profit for private clients. The Western elite pipeline calibrated a generation of experts to extract financial value from existing assets, rather than build new, resilient systems. The physical result of this spreadsheet logic is visible in places like Detroit. To meet those quarterly targets, managers offshored domestic production to global value chains throughout the 2000s. The National Bureau of Economic Research quantified the human cost. Between 1999 and 2011, rising Chinese import competition displaced 22.4 million U.S. manufacturing jobs. This mass migration of industry was justified by a model known as the Cost Differential Frontier, or CDF. CDF is an analytical framework that compares the direct wage savings of overseas manufacturing against the hidden volatility costs of extended global sourcing. Managers stretched supply chains across the ocean to shave a few percentage points off labor expenses. To make the CDF model look efficient on paper, companies adopted just-in-time delivery. They stripped away physical warehouses and emergency inventory to reduce carrying costs. But removing those buffers created fragile, single points of failure. When shipping was disrupted in 2020, the lack of local inventory caused immediate shortages of medical gear and basic goods. These profitability calculations, guided by strict cost minimization, blind leadership to the long-run strategic costs of an eroded industrial base. While the West elevated the manager, China took a different path. Following its 1978 economic reforms, the Chinese government made a deliberate decision to staff its upper echelons with scientists and engineers. According to Reuters data, in the early 2000s, 8 of 9 members of the Politburo Standing Committee held degrees in engineering or the physical sciences. In this technocratic culture, decision-makers prioritize technical problem-solving and build redundant just-in-case supply chains, keeping strategic sectors like advanced materials and semiconductors under state control. The policy outcome was an industrial expansion. China's manufacturing sector grew at 9% annually for 2 straight decades, providing the foundation for domestic stability and military modernization. Western managers were taught to discount strategic vulnerability to boost corporate dividends. Eastern engineers were trained to internalize those risks and build physical fortresses. History provides a warning for systems that lose touch with physical production. During the 17th century, the imperial Chinese Ming dynasty collapsed under external pressure and internal rebellion. The empire had handed its bureaucracy over to a civilian literati class. These scholars built their entire careers on abstract literary exams, leaving the government unequipped for the physical logistics of war. The modern West has developed its own MBA literati. We have supplied our highest decision-making roles with a class of managers whose primary metric is shareholder value, rather than the physical survival of the nation. This matrix illustrating the cascading shock model predicts that under stress, the MBA's just-in-time system contracts and fails. In contrast, the engineer-led system's redundancy acts as a shock absorber, keeping the core machinery running. A nation that prioritizes financial engineering over physical capability cannot survive in an era defined by energy wars, pandemics, and great power competition. To reclaim economic sovereignty, the West must re-engineer its education and leadership pipeline. We can start with immediate policy shifts. The government should overhaul procurement laws to reward life cycle value over the lowest bid, and mandate that the strategic national stockpile is manufactured on domestic soil. We also need to create fast-track pathways for technical engineers to enter senior policy roles at the Department of Defense and Treasury, matching the technocratic advantage of geopolitical rivals. We must move past the profit-first mantra and return power to the builders, because a robust industrial base is the only true foundation for long-term peace and prosperity.